Hi, I'm Max Aita. Thank you for subscribing to the Juggernaut YouTube channel, and check out our new apparel by clicking the link in the bio.
Hey everybody, Chad Wesley Smith here, joined by the Montana Miracle Man, the notorious MAX, Max Aita. Today we're going to talk to you about what seems like a simple concept on its face, but is critical to success within a training cycle and long-term success. And that's about how to select your training weights and then progress them from week to week, microcycle to microcycle, and then macrocycle to macrocycle. If you're failing to select the proper weights, it could mean that your training isn't challenging enough, or that you're overreaching too soon, you're running into fatigue management problems, and maybe you're missing a lot of lifts in training. And of course, you don't become stronger by missing lifts, you become stronger by making them, and besides the psychological benefits of making as many of your lifts or all your lifts in training. So the first thing is it's very important to start slow. Depending on how you train, a lot of our programs are written as a 3 up, 1 down structure. So we're training 1 week hard, then harder, then hardest, and then take a deload and begin again with that. So it's important to start slow within that context. It's important to start slow that microcycle 1 is compared to your final peaking cycle. And why it's so important to do that is that you build in flexibility to the training. The principle of overload, which we have a very extensive video on, dictates that training must become harder over time. So with that, if you go to absolute maximum in week 1 of a program, how do you go harder than absolute maximum? To assume that for anyone beyond the most novice of lifters, you're going to make that immediate progress would just be a mistake right off the bat. So you need to start with a little bit slightly more conservative weights, so you give yourself room to improve from week to week, and can, in that 3rd week of the training cycle, maybe hit the PR then. But set yourself up for success through the microcycle or through the entire training cycle by starting slower and more conservative. Because even as cliche as it sounds, it doesn't matter where you start, it matters where you finish.
Right, and exactly, because what we're looking for is the target. What is our goal at the end of the progression of weights? We want to set ourselves up to hit the final target. And that final target from macrocycle to macrocycle builds on itself to the end goal, the final target at the competition. So when we're setting up our training cycle, just as Chad said, we want to start slow in the progression from week to week to week so that we can hit our final target that 3rd week or 4th week or however many weeks you're progressing. It's most important to know what our targets are, because that gives us a good idea as to where we start in the beginning. If this is the first time we're progressing, we don't have the target, we still start conservatively and we build on that until we get to the point where we need to deload. From the standpoint of having a target already established, we know what our best number is that we're aiming for. We can backtrack from that and find the correct starting position, the correct place to start so that we hit our targets at the end. Super important to build as we progress from week to week in the macro cycles, so that we don't end up overreaching too early and ending up with a less than stellar training cycle.
So a very common way that Max and I will write programs would be something like, in week 1, 5 rep max at 8 RPE, and then week 2, 5 rep max at 9 RPE, and then week 3, 5 rep max at 10 RPE. And while RPE does leave some subjectivity and is going to sort of ebb and flow with your accumulated fatigue, you know that in week 1, if you go to 10 RPE, that's going to generate more fatigue from week 2, or going into week 2, making it more difficult to hit the numbers that you want. So let's say if 315 for 5 is your established 5 rep max, then choosing a target number like 320 or 325 for 5 in week 3 of the program would be a great way to do that. And then setting yourself up with reasonable jumps from week to week. Maybe 295 for 5 at 8 RPE in week 1, 305 or 310 for 5 at a 9 RPE in week 2, setting yourself up for that PR of 320 or 325 for 5 in week 3. And then as you progress into the next macro cycle of training, maybe those 5 rep maxes are going down to 3 rep maxes. How you adjust the weights there can be done a lot of different ways. If you don't have established 3 rep maxes, probably what you want to do is use a rep max calculator, which need to be taken, of course, with some grains of salt, but because they're not 100% accurate. But as you get into those 5, 3, 2, those 5, 3, and 2 rep maxes, as they project to a 1 rep max, they're going to be pretty good. So let's say you did 325 for 5 in week 3 at a 10 RPE in the previous cycle. You can put that in the rep max calculator, and I'm just pulling the number out here, but let's say that that projects to a 375 1 rep max. If you don't already have established 3 rep maxes, you'd want to play around with the rep max calculator and figure out, all right, my 5 rep max projected me to 375, so now I want my 3 rep max to project me to 380. Really, 376 plus is all winning. So choose the weights that way. So let's say it's a 345 for 3 that projects you to 376 plus. You'd set it up the same way. 345 is the target in week 3, so we're going to do 335 in week 2 and 325 in week 1.
Right, and from phase to phase and from cycle to cycle, the same thing applies. Once you've completed one training cycle, having gone through all of these phases before, let's say you've done 8s and 10s, 5s and the strength cycle, and even 3s and singles, you can repeat the training cycle again, knowing exactly where you were before. So it's easy to just adjust your numbers up 5-10 pounds or 5-10 kilos, depending how strong you are, and shoot for those new targets. So you start again slow and build towards those new targets. And remember that training doesn't happen in a vacuum. So we can adjust as we go. We don't have to start exactly at this point to hit this big target at the end that may be unreasonable. We want to accomplish the right amount of work, and we want to accomplish good quality work as we train. It's more important to make some overload each week than it is to hit giant targets and pick things that are out of reach.
People ask all the time, should they be training off a competition maximum, a training maximum? And the only time that that really matters, even on a percentage-based program, to be honest, is the very first week of training, is picking just that first starting point. And whether you use a competition maximum, a projected maximum, a training maximum, a conservative maximum, a true max that you take 90% of, whatever it is, that's one weight out of the whole program. But if you understand the principles that go into that and into program design, you'll be able to start with whatever weight it was and be able to tell from that workout, hey, that was too light, or maybe that was too heavy, go up or down 5 or 10 pounds, and 2, at most probably 3 workouts in, have things dialed into what are the appropriate weights for each training session. That's another reason why it's important to start slow, and is going to be very useful in helping you pick appropriate targets and adjust from week to week. Because if you have established rep maxes, even if you're training off a competition max or a training max, it's tough to adjust that number from phase to phase. But if you have established rep maxes and I just hit a 10-pound PR on my 8 rep max, and I was working off of a 400-pound training max, well, that was a 10-pound PR. So now if it's percentages in the next phase, just bump up your training max by 10 pounds. Or if you're just working off of the straight numbers, the way that I do and the way that I write programs for my more advanced clients, where we just start at the meet and work backwards from there. We say, all right, this was a 10-pound PR, let's just bump the subsequent numbers up 10 pounds. Now, it doesn't have to be overly complicated, but this is, while it's not an overly complicated subject, it is critical to success, both in the short term and the long term. And on that same note of training not happening in a vacuum, know that if you're reaching for the big numbers too soon, that higher numbers, absolute maximum training to failure or nearer failure, generates more fatigue. And doing that in week 1 or week 2 of a 3-week microcycle, you're going to throw the entire plan off, because the training you do today affects the training you do tomorrow, the next day, so on and so forth. So going to absolute maximum when maybe it's not appropriate in your training plan could have some negative ramifications down the road and end up violating fatigue management as well as the principle of overload, in that it doesn't allow you to continually progress the numbers. And again, the principle of overload dictates that training must become heavier over time. I'm Chad Wesley Smith. Hopefully you enjoyed the video and learned something. If you did, like the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel.